experience as being in the internment camps. So the 100th Infantry were then taken from where they were, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, all the way down to Mississippi. And before that, I'm sorry, take that back. Now, while they were in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, some top military officers wanted to test out a theory. And this theory was suggested by a Swiss Army officer, immigrant dog trainer. He convinced President Roosevelt's administration that the dogs could be trained to attack Japanese soldiers for the war in the Pacific. Now again, if you've seen that movie Midway, they showed the attacks occurring in Pearl Harbor, and then they went to the Coral Seas, and then on to Midway. And what they needed was men of Japanese ancestry to be test subjects. So, 25 minutes. So one night, these 25 men were flown out of Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, down to, this is when they went to Gulfport, Mississippi. It says Harrison there. From Gulfport, they went down, caught a small boat, went down to Ship Island. And Ship Island is an island that's about 900 miles off the coast of Gulfport. Tiny island. They were told to set up barracks, build your barracks, get comfortable for 2 weeks, and then we'll tell you what your mission is. So while they were there, they had a pretty good time for 2 weeks. They liked to sing songs, music, and they got to fish. And there was a lot of fish in the Gulf. So after this 2-week time period, their major came to tell them what their secret mission was. It was to train dogs on a nearby island called Cat Island. Again, Cat Island, you can see it's a teeny island just west of Ship Island. Cat Island is a tiny island, about 48 miles long by 3 miles wide. And no, there were no cats there, by the way. Apparently, in the 1600s, some French explorers came into the Gulf, passed this island, and they saw what they thought was a lot of cats. Well, it turns out there were hundreds of raccoons on this island. Now, I don't know why or where they came from, but today you can see a few raccoons there. Okay, so again, Cat Island is a tiny island, and when my dad was there, he said it was full of alligators and snakes and mosquitoes. So that's what the atmosphere was like in Cat Island. So what they did was they went back and forth. Their barracks were at Ship Island. They would go to Cat Island daily to do their mission. Okay, so finally their major came to tell them that their mission was to train dogs on Cat Island. And in other words, to train the dogs to sniff out Japanese blood, and they were to be the dog bait. All for the war in the Pacific. So my dad had to make the dogs hate them, chase them, and find them. And to make this hate occur, they had to beat the dogs with burlap knots while the dogs were tied up. And then they would release the dogs, and the dogs would have to chase them, and a lot of times up trees. And at the height of the testing, to lure the dogs even more, the men would have to put pieces of meat on their bodies. And they wore hockey protection, but this was not enough. And my dad said he got bitten numerous times. This was really what Cat Island looked like. It was a fairly flat island with trees growing, and the only way to get to Cat Island was to get on a boat, get into the water, and then walk to the island because they had no docks or piers there. And if you know the Gulf, of course you hear lots of stories of hurricanes. So they had to endure the hurricanes there, and at one point one of Dad's friends fell overboard and nearly drowned. So they experienced a lot of things in the Gulf. Okay, and also, as I said, there were alligators. So they did experience the alligators there too. So after they stayed there for 5 months, going back and forth to from Ship Island to Cat Island. And after these 5 months, they found that the theory of the Japanese Americans having a certain blood smell were bogus. This theory didn't hold any water. The dogs were reacting to the beatings. Go figure. So after these 5 months, these 25 men were taken to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and there they rejoined the 100th Battalion. And they were they were there to do more advanced basic training, they called them. Now, while they were in Mississippi, they did experience prejudice of another kind. And people there didn't know what to make of them. They weren't black, they weren't white, they were brown, and they wore military uniforms. And they couldn't tell them exactly why they were there. So they weren't allowed in certain places in Mississippi. So, heading forward, in September 1943, the 100th Battalion joined in Mississippi with the 442nd, which is a famous Gopher Broke unit. And this unit of the 442 was made up of Japanese American men, and a lot of them came out of internment camps. So, while they were volunteering to come fight for the United States, their parents were in prison, still in the internment camps. So they said goodbye to them there, and their parents always told them, be loyal Americans, follow orders, and don't shame us. So the men followed orders. This is what they did. So, as I said, in September 43, when they were joined with the 442, the men, they were all shipped to Oran, Africa, and then to Italy to fight the Germans. Now, my dad was wounded in battle and eventually sent back to Hawaii. But as a side story, when he was wounded, he crawled into a cave and to wait for help. And that night, he said a dog came and slept with him and kept him warm. And he never forgot that. Growing up in Hawaii, I remember we always had German Shepherd dogs, one after the other, as pets. And I never knew why. But post-war, June 1995, 50 years later, my dad and mom in Hawaii got a travel tour together to go to Fort McCoy, which was now Fort instead of Camp, McCoy, Wisconsin, and Camp Shelby. And I just went blank. And anyway, my dad invited families of the 100th Battalion to join him, to go back to these places so that they could see the historical places where they were doing their basic training. And we were invited to come. So my sister and I joined in to actually see some of this history. And by this time, the men of the 100th and 442 had proven themselves to be loyal Americans. It took a long time. About 90% or more of them had earned the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the Legion of Merit, Medal of Honor, Silver Star, and other medals. In fact, this year, in January of 2020, in our spokesman review, and I think some of you may have seen that, they had our own Steve Gleason in the front page of this, and it showed him receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, in the back, it had about 100 or so of people who are organizations who had also received the Congressional Medal of Honor, Congressional Gold Medal, I'm sorry. And this dates all the way back from 1776, George Washington, to January of 2020. And it says in October 5th, 2010, the 100th Infantry Battalion and 442nd Regimental Combat Team were awarded this honor. I thought that was great. So while we were there in Mississippi, we also got to go to Ship Island. So we were there, and that's when I heard my dad gave a talk about Cat Island Secret Mission. And that was the first time, 50 years later, that I had heard about this. And as my dad told this story, he was crying. And if anybody knew my dad, he knows he never cries. And this was my first time in Mississippi. And we were welcome there. But this was not to be the last time. Fast forward again, 13 years later, in 2008, my dad got a call and a letter from the program series on PBS called The History Detectives. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. Yeah, anyway, this is a show started in the 2000s about happenings, stories brought out by clues, and the sleuthing involved to get to what was happening. But apparently somebody at an auction found a letter that had the words Cat Island, dog bait, Japanese Americans during World War II. And so he was very interested to know what this was all about. So he contacted the PBS. They researched everything. And this led back to This led back to my dad and his 24 friends. So, and some of them were killed while fighting in Italy and France. But by this time, the secret mission was out in the open, and my dad was free to talk about it, and he did. He wanted people to know what had happened so that it wouldn't happen again. So my dad was invited to come to Gulfport, Mississippi in October 2008 to be interviewed and filmed for this program. So my mom, my sister, and myself accompanied my then 92-year-old dad. And this was about 3 years after Hurricane Katrina had happened. So the filming took place and was aired in 2008. While we were there, we had lunch at this small restaurant, and right outside the restaurant was a newsstand. And right in the front page was my dad. in the Sun Herald. Cat Island's History Lures PBS. Okay, we're going to go another 10 years, 2019. I was sent an email from a filmmaker and writer from San Francisco. He heard about this Cat Island story and secret mission, and he wanted to know more about it. So he had various sources, one of which was this book called Japanese Eyes, American Heart, written by a lot of the men from the 100 and 442, just short stories. And one of them was Cat Island in here. So, this man, the filmmaker, wanted to make a long documentary film about this. And he wanted to interview as many of the descendants as he could while telling the story. And by this time, 2019, all the 25 men were deceased. My dad passed away in June of 2014 at the age of 98 years old. So in October 2019, Attila, the filmmaker, interviewed my sister, myself, and many other descendants. And when he came to Spokane, he wanted suggestions as to where to film. And one of the places was Covenant. And so I got permission to do this. And he interviewed me in the sanctuary, with the backdrop being the origami butterflies, which have the meaning of hope and love and change, so appropriate. And for me, this was like coming full circle. Now I was able to tell my dad's story as I am to you, telling you now. Okay, we're going to try something again.
Hey, is your father still alive?
No, he passed away in 2014.
Oh.
So,
And he used to live in Mississippi?
no, he used to live in Hawaii.
Hawaii.
But he did go to Mississippi. Okay.
Of course, that explains the...
You're learning, be working with dogs. He was excited at first,
I always like dogs, so I feel I love them.
until his commander told him he and 19 other Japanese American soldiers would be dog bait.
Supposed to be smell like a dog, Japanese anime. So they want us to train the dogs.
For 5 months, he beat dogs.
How to get them hard to the blades.
He taught them to attack him.
Then they told me, drop the stick and walk over 10 yards. I walked 10 yards. He said, okay, turn around. When you turn around, I'm ready because they thought I'll kill him.
All his wounds have long healed, except the one in his heart.
I feel so bad. If I think of the dog, I feel bad. I don't know why we have to go through all that.
The mission failed, but remained classified for 50 more years. The memories for Nosaka are as fresh today as they were in 1942.
It's inside here that you don't forget.
Okay. So, I know my dad would have been so pleased that the story would come out to a larger audience, and urged that something like this should never have occurred, just as the Japanese American internment camp should have never happened. Now, I was with my dad when he passed away in Hawaii in 2014, and the very next day, I phoned Bill here in Spokane to tell him about my dad passing away. And he related a story to me. He said that day, he had a vision of my dad. Bill was mowing the lawn, and he suddenly saw my dad out in the front lawn, and he was laughing, and all these dogs were around him. He saw it plain as day. He said he just couldn't get over it. And for my dad, I think it was sort of like forgiveness, because he never got over beating those dogs. In the Bible, John 7:24 says, "Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." I thank you for coming and listening. Sorry that first part didn't come out, but anyway.
I know that must have been very hard.
I have a question. Did he ever say how many dogs were actually trained, and did they use those dogs for any purpose after they were
I don't know the number of dogs, but then there were numerous dogs that they actually trained to go over and fight in the Pacific. But as far as sniffing out certain nationalities, Japanese, no, they couldn't do that. That theory went down the drain. But yeah, there were a lot of dogs that went over.
What happened to the guy who wanted to do the program?
Yeah, what happened to him?
Swiss guy?
Yeah, good question. I saw a letter that was written about him, but eventually they just told him, your theory didn't work, and we're not going to use, your theory. So he was just quietly dismissed.
Good. That to me is nothing but a racist.
Did your dad serve with or know Daniel Inouye, who became the senior senator from Hawaii?
Yes, he knew him very well. In fact, the video that I had that didn't work showed Daniel Inouye in there. He was the senator in Hawaii, passing.
Did he ever know a guy by the name of Dr. Sui?
I don't know.
Because he was a friend in my hometown of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He was a doctor and he served in World War II in some battalion. And
If he was in the 442 or the 100th, yeah, my dad would have
well, he was
known
in the
him.
442.
He would have served with him, yes.
You know, he was a wonderful man, by the way.
Anyway, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.